So, colleagues and friends, my name is Mike Hardy. I have the privilege of being the next chair of the ILA. Bit in trepidation. No. I think when I've been chair for a couple of years, you can then make a judgment and applaud, but not until then. So I'm really delighted that we have such an engaging final plenary session, and I know how much energy and excitement there's been over the last few days. And we were looking last night at, if I could find a word to sum it up from my experience. It's been quite intense, many sessions, many new friendships, and many renewed old friendships. And I thought, was it fantastic? Not really. And was it amazing? Which is a word often used by Desmond Tutu when he's in such circumstances. But I actually think it was magnificent, so that's my word. It's been magnificent because it's been greater than we expected in terms of its impact. I want, and I hope from my remarks, people will leave energized, but recalling that we haven't finished anything. We've only just begun. We've opened up new doorways, new pathways, which we should continue down. The comments that I have are very few, and I just wanted to set the scene for this final session, if I can get it to work. And I've been asked to look at looking forward, which seems reasonable and I'm not doing very well with my technology, and mobilizing our new mission, the refreshment of the way we think about how we advance leadership knowledge and practice for a better world. And we can wordsmith all we like, and I wanted to focus very briefly in 2 or 3 minutes on what I think this means and what challenges it brings us as we continue the journey of the ILA and as we continue the journey of our commitment to this area. I want to remind everyone that we are live streaming. We've got a very overactive. We're live streaming, so I'm going to pause to wave to William, who's my grandson. I do so unashamedly because, you know, I've learned more from my grandson than I ever imagined was possible in the short time. He's my best friend. And one of the things about our relationship is something that I've taken to my professional work on a daily basis. And that is, wouldn't it be a better world if the relationships we had were not always based on judgment? And the relationship I have with my best friend, William, is not based on judgment. It's based on shared exploration, sometimes common ground, but not always, on respect, on mutual, reciprocal conversations. We talk all the time as we're jumping into puddles and as I get into trouble with his mother. In our revised thinking, we had the audacity, some would say arrogance, to talk about a better world, that we should mobilize the resource that we've corralled together within the ILA and will continue to grow if we have any success in our strategies. And we want to mobilize that and help resource a better world. And it's quite arrogant and audacious to do that in a sense without then exploring what we mean by a better world. But sometimes it's quite helpful just to think with humility that our world can get better. And of course it can, as we know it will. So the 3 things I want to leave you with in this is my call for action. And this is, if anyone asks, what you'll be doing over the next period as chair. The first thing I'll be doing, I have to say, is trying to live up to the standards and to the amazing contribution of the current chair, Kathy Tyler-Scott, who's an amazing person, a very good friend, and in whose shoes and on whose shoulders I need now to step up and stand. So thank you, Catherine, for the work that you've done. But of the things we've heard this week, I wanted to focus on these 3 issues. We must examine the role we can play We must interrogate the competence we have and the place we are, whether we're academics, practitioners, whether we're from the corporate sector, from government sector. We must know our role and be good at it, be focused on it, and then we can hopefully make a small contribution. We look in ourselves, as many of you have said, before we share with others. Secondly, as we were reminded by the astounding keynotes that we've had earlier, we must be very conscious of context, not be dismayed by it or distracted by it, but be conscious of context. Context matters. The place matters. We must, as the ILA, reflect on our international commitments and not be driven by a North American set of values alone. We must be humble enough to know that we have huge lessons to learn from different contexts and different places. Exploring content will be a responsibility we must take. And thirdly, we have to move quickly into what I'm calling deliberative action. Not accidental things that we do as a consequence of bouncing into good friends or others' practice that we like, but quite deliberate action that will make a difference to the quality of lives of ordinary people. That's the better world that I see. It's a very difficult task, and we have to shake ourselves down through role, through context, and through a commitment to deliberative action. Only then, I think, will our commitment to mobilizing and advancing knowledge and practice of leadership for a better world. And I want to leave you with an image that I took. Some of you know I did a lot of work in the north of Ireland at a time of considerable stress. This is a bar, a public house on Montgomery Street, not far from the waterfront, in a place or context hugely divided, with sectarian divides, and even now, in its peace, is not a peaceful place. It's a place full of amazing people and social capital. And one of the people there had written on the side of this public house for all to see, and it's a permanent thing, and when you visit, as you must, it's an amazing place, Belfast, you'll find it. And I think it speaks loudly, not just of that place or of many others, it also speaks loudly of the International Leadership Association, if I could be so bold. A nation that keeps one eye on the past is wise. An association that keeps one eye on the past is wise. We have an amazing legacy and a history, our foundation as the ILA. A very significant journey was started, and we're 20 years on. But a nation that keeps two eyes on the past is blind. And an association that doesn't adapt and absorb the opportunities in the future will also be blind. And a blind organization and a blind nation does nothing for the people whose lives we can affect for the better. It's a great picture, and it's an important reminder to me of how we advance leadership and knowledge and practice for a better world, by keeping one foot very firmly in our experience past, but taking risk, opening opportunities and taking chances. So thank you very much for those opening remarks. I'll finish briefly. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce Heather Henderson to the stage to announce the student case winners. Heather, would you join me? I'm going to let you do this. Thank you very much for your support.
Thank you, Mike. Very much appreciate the warm welcome. I also am so excited to announce the winners of this year's case competition. It was absolutely amazing for any of you that got to see the poster session on Wednesday. If you came to round 3 yesterday, it was absolutely the most amazing session for me to see the work that the students and the coaches had done. And then, of course, we couldn't have done it without the great work of the judges. And we had judges volunteer from, honestly, all over the world. Not American-based, not based in Europe. The judges came from everywhere, and that was such a refreshing and wonderful thing to see as well. So thank you all. Not to take time away from presentations or announcing the winners, I'll look first to the graduate level and say that at round 3, in fact, our 3 finalists were all outstanding. In 3rd place was the University of Maryland. In 2nd place, Washburn University. And in 1st place, Christopher Newport University Blue Team. So while I will invite the winners up to the stage, I also have to tell you, it was amazing. Tom Yanuzzi spent hours and hours and hours looking at the data. And you know what? In the end, we were just so close. The numbers just finally, I guess, told the story, but it was incredibly close. So Janelle Brown, Nathan Holtz, and Adam Stillbauer here to the stage. So a further announcement to that, I left these at the table. Obviously, I didn't bring them up here. But the Academic Leadership Center out of Saudi Arabia, who was one of our sponsors, actually gave a gift for the top team as well. So a small memento that they can put up in their school to say, Yahoo, look at what we did. So big thanks to them as well. And way to go, undergrad teams and coaches. At the graduate level, we had 3 teams that advanced also on to the final round and to the presentations last night. And Tom happened to be with the undergrad level, and I was with the graduates, and they did an outstanding job. In 3rd place was Louisiana State University. In 2nd, Florida State. And in 1st place, Robert Morris University. So if those people can come up to the stage, we've got Rebecca Barnes, Linda Mayers, Sean Phelan, and Samantha Walkley. Are you here? Oh, there they are. So again, as they're making their way up to the stage, I can also tell you that the Academic Leadership Center sponsor out of Saudi Arabia also had a small gift for them that they can take back to their schools as well. Thanks again. I'll turn it back to Mike. And again, just a reminder that they all did a fabulous job, and teams, coaches, and judges. Remember, we couldn't do it without you. Thank you.
Very much, Heather. Thank you. Heather, thank you very much. There's an enormous amount of work that goes into the judging as well as in the doing. The doing's important. And it's now my great pleasure to introduce our plenary speaker, who's known to all of us. Barbara Kellerman is an innovator, a prolific author, amazing contributions now at the Kennedy School at Harvard University. We're so grateful that you've come and provide your words of wisdom and your counsel. Barbara's going to speak for a period, and then there'll be an opportunity for some questions and answers. And we've had a chat beforehand, and Barbara's going to handle the Q&A herself. I'm just going to regulate the time, and thank you so much, Barbara.
So it has come to my attention just a few minutes ago, and some of you in the audience may know this, some of you will not, that there was a shooting in a synagogue this morning in Pittsburgh, and I believe some people died. That's the full extent of what I know, but I thought in Out of respect for what happened just today, not to speak of the events of the last week or the last months or the last years, however you want to phrase it, why don't we just pause for maybe 30 seconds before I start talking. I will deliver some formal prepared remarks, and then, as Mike said, thank you, Mike, for the introduction. We will have, I hope, some time for Q&A. Interestingly, by sheer coincidence, the first words of my speech echo, or should I say foreshadow, what I just reported. The speech, as I think you know, is called Standards. One day, late last August, the New York Times printed and posted several articles that signal my speech on standards. When Erin Schroeder ran for Congress in 2016, she woke to find tens of thousands of messages in her email, on her phone, and posted to various other social media. One said, and I quote, "All would laugh with glee as they gang raped her and then bashed her bagel-eating brains in," unquote. Another said it'd be amusing to see her take 20 or so for 8 to 10 hours, unquote, again suggesting gang rape. In the case of Erin Schroeder, at least, the abuses, a toxic sludge of online trolling steeped in misogyny and anti-Semitism that also included photoshopped images of her face stretched into a lampshade and references to preheating the ovens, never stopped. In this election cycle, in 2018, the abuses against women in politics have only increased. A Democrat running for a congressional seat in Iowa, Kim Weaver, gave up her campaign against the Republican incumbent when a neo-Nazi website published an article about her titled, quote, "Meet the whore who's running against Stephen King," unquote. On the same day, it was August 26th to be precise, the Times published another article on a different subject altogether that nevertheless was all about, you got it, the erosion of standards that in recent years has gone from creep to gallop. Quote, "Trump assails the legal system," unquote, ran the headline, eroding trust. Whatever you might think of President Donald Trump, it is inarguable that in the last year he has relentlessly criticized the Justice Department, fired some of its top officials, questioned the integrity of prosecutors leading the investigation on Russia, mercilessly demeaned and defiled his own Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, and more generally recklessly bandied about terms with possible legal implications such as flip, witch hunt, treason, and lock her up. The president's flagrant flaunting of respect for the law, and for that matter, for anything resembling civil discourse more generally, threatens increasingly not only to erode further faith in our legal system, but more importantly, to further erode public trust in the various pillars of American democracy. I hasten to add that the American presidency is not the only institution, the only American institution, to be so diminished. As we recently witnessed, the Senate has dropped the rules of decorum that for most of American history were the hallmark of what once was referred to as the world's greatest deliberative body. And it manifestly shed some simple, but one would have thought, essential standards such as veracity and the virtues of the rules of evidence. That the Supreme court itself has recently been diminished in the eyes of many, if not most Americans, goes nearly without saying. Nor are standards being eroded only in the public sector. In that same issue of the New York Times, the private sector contributes mightily to the sense that in the United States, and I will get to the rest of the world momentarily, that something's off, that everything is in decline. There is a growing suspicion that a few behemoth companies in several of the nation's key industries suppress both wages and growth. There is the growing suspicion that a few behemoth technology companies control too much of our individual lives and intrude on too much of our collective lives. And there is the growing suspicion that those few at the top see nothing wrong with their being infinitely better off, even than those in the middle, not to speak of those at the bottom. Since 1978, the average American paycheck has increased 11.2%. During this exact same period, the average CEO's pay has increased 937%. Even the American dream has effectively vanished, or better, moved north to Canada. Moving from the bottom fifth of the income level to the top fifth is now twice as likely to happen in Canada as in the US. Nor, obviously, have standards eroded only in the United States. Again, in that very same issue of the New York Times was an article that described the Irish Catholic Church as being, quote, in tatters, that alluded to related wretched recent abuses uncovered in Chile, as well as in the United States, and that described Pope Francis, obviously, who was repeatedly reduced to voicing regret at the legacy of abuse in the Catholic Church worldwide. Of course, the Church is not the only institution that has been so charged. Moreover, one could argue that the revelations of abuse of minors, which cascaded beginning in 22, are helping to restore standards, not abetting their diminishment still further. But it cannot be denied that the revelations themselves and the Church's real reluctance fully to face the implications thereof have contributed significantly to the sense that what we used to assume were generally high standards of behavior by people in positions of authority, whether priests or teachers, judges or generals, private sector executives or public sector politicians, was an illusion. Where once we thought, or perhaps foolishly presumed, were generally high standards of personal and professional conduct, now we know this was an illusion again. This is not, of course, to say that every leader is bad, painted with a sullied brush. Rather, it is to say that we have a stronger sense that people, all people, no matter their status or station, are a complicated mix of passions, proclivities, and personalities, drives, motives, and incentives, sensitivities, sensibilities, and standards. Additionally, we now know that in some cases are virtually no standards at all, at least not as we conventionally think of them. No standards at the level of the institution, think Volkswagen or Wells Fargo, the Department of the Interior or the city of Flint, Michigan, and no standards at the individual. I could name a list of Americans and foreigners as well. Since I am speaking to you today, members of the International Leadership Association, let me state directly that leaders, defined for the present purpose as those in positions of power and authority, have contributed mightily to this decline, to the erosion of standards, or at a minimum to the perceived decline of the erosion of standards. The reasons for this are complex, at least they are for the present purposes twofold. The first is changes in our culture, arguably especially those that relate to levels of transparency. We now tend to know, we now tend to demand to know the details of dalliances of presidents of the United States. We now tend to know, we now tend to demand to know the drinking habits and sexual proclivities of nominees for the Supreme Court. We now tend to know, we now tend to demand to know the intricacies of intimacies practiced by men in positions of power and authority on women who are not. Yes, sex matters more than it did. We now tend to know, however, we also now demand to know the truths about taxes and finances, about money stashed at home or abroad, about hidden bank accounts, secret payoffs, and shady dealings. The level of transparency is now such that people with zero power, authority, and influence feel more entitled to be told whatever there is to be told about those who rank higher than they. We now have victims of clerical abuse stepping up and willingly testifying to what was done to them when they were children and adolescents. We now have investigative reporters unearthing dirt on some of the highest and mightiest of our species. We now have women coming out and taking on men in ways previously unheard of. The result is that leaders have been increasingly demystified, denigrated, and demeaned. Something of a sea change. The extreme changes in our culture have, of course, been aided and abetted by the extreme changes in our technologies. I hardly need point out to this group the impact of social media on patterns of dominance and deference, on the dynamics between those who apparently are powerful and those who apparently are powerless. The Me Too movement, arguably led by the work of 3 investigative journalists, is just one example, albeit a striking one, of the intersections of which I speak. The Me Too movement is all about sex, or, if you would prefer, it's about dominance and submission, or, if you would prefer, it's all about power and the lack thereof. It is, in any case, about the behaviors that went nearly entirely unreported for most of human history, but that have become only recently grist for our collective mill. The fact that sexual harassment and sexual abuse, along with other nasty proclivities, such as virulent racism, homophobia, and anti-Semitism, have to a degree been outed, certainly in the United States, is attributable to changes in the culture. But this outing would have been impossible absent the presence of social media, a technology that has enabled, indeed encouraged, an uncontainable contagion. It is no wonder that in authoritarian systems, the suppression of the internet is arguably the highest priority. Sad to say that the severe erosion of leadership, the destructive, dramatic decline in standards, in the conviction that the U.S. is exceptional in its moral core, in trust in leading individuals and in the institutions that they profess to lead, has coincided completely with the rise of, the burgeoning of, what some of you in this audience know that I refer to as the leadership industry. The 2 axes intersect almost exactly. The decline of the one, leadership, intersects with the rise of the other, the leadership industry. I at least think this must, or at least this should, give us pause. I am not, of course, suggesting that the leadership industry, of which virtually every one of us here in this room, in attendance in this room is a card-carrying member, is responsible for this decline. What I am saying, though, is that manifestly we have been unable to stop it, to stem the tarnished tide. We in the leadership industry continue to do our thing, while the context within which inevitably we are embedded testifies to the inability of leaders, most strikingly and sadly in liberal democracies, to make followers feel that they are being led wisely and well. While leaders in other sectors are, as I've indicated, not immune, the decline of political leaders in liberal democracies, especially in the last 5 years or so, has been especially painful to witness. Nearly no nation has been immune to the trend. The US, as an example, under Donald Trump is obvious. Great Britain has struggled, is struggling mightily to its indefinite detriment with the question of how to manage Brexit. France's Emmanuel Macron, just 18 months ago, widely perceived as a boy wonder, has endured a strikingly rapid and dramatic decline in his approval ratings. Angela Merkel, for years a stalwart of Western leadership, is manifestly on the wane and on the way out. Sweden, in most of our eyes, a paragon of Western virtues, is enduring a crisis of governance and confidence. Europe's eastern countries, such as Austria, Hungary, and Poland, have had their democracies put to the test by shifts toward populism, nationalism, and some would argue flat-out authoritarianism. In our own hemisphere, Brazil and Venezuela testify how close we are to dangerous various precipices. And nations that less than 10 years ago had shown signs of loosening the reins of authority, nations such as Russia, China, Egypt, and Turkey, have in more recent years reverted again to tightening them. Each of these countries, and then some, are more impressive and oppressive and repressive than they were a decade ago. Standards of human decency, of human rights, have not ascended, they have descended. Which brings us inevitably to two hard questions. The first is general. How and why during the last decade did we arrive at this sorry pass? As I suggested, larger forces are at play here, such as changes in culture and technology. There is additionally the overarching trajectory of human history and the various cycles of history to which I often in my teaching and writings refer. The second question, though, is specific. What has the leadership industry, specifically those of us deeply dedicated to a well-intentioned association such as this one, the International Leadership Association, on this occasion justly celebrating its 20th anniversary, done to address the deep, steep decline in trust in what we might broadly call the leadership class? What, in other words, have we putative leadership experts, contributed to the improvement of the human condition during a time when leading in liberal democracies, indeed leading everywhere, seems more complex, complicated, convoluted, and confounding a task than ever? How have we in the leadership industry, we in the International Leadership Association, been responsible, been accountable? I do not for one moment question the proposition that as individuals and in groups, those of us in the International Leadership Association have done good work. What I do question, though, is whether the work that we have done is good enough. What I do question, though, is whether the good work that we did do is being adequately disseminated and actually implemented. What I do question, though, is whether as individuals and especially as a collective, we have done enough to address the decline in standards to which I here refer. What I do question, though, is whether we have taken a good hard look at the work we do as a critical mass of experts, leadership professionals. What I do question, though, is whether there is more that we can do, more that we should do to elevate leaders in the eyes of their followers. What I do question, though, is whether there is more that we can do, more that we should do to raise the standards to which leaders are held. What I do question, though, is whether all of us, including those of us putative experts and educators in this organization, the International Leadership Association, have done the very best we know how to help leaders and leader learners do better. Let me provide just one quick and I think telling example. My colleague and friend, Denny Roberts, recently brought to my attention, after, I should add, I crafted most of this speech, the fact that in 2012, the board of the International Leadership Association was presented with a white paper that called for, and I quote here, more conscious attention to both legitimacy and accountability of leadership as a field of study within higher education. This white paper, which I have now had a chance to read, is a smart, serious, and sensible attempt to apply standards to leadership learning, standards that include steps such as internal program reviews, external program reviews, certification, and accreditation. As I further understand it, however, the ILA board tabled the idea at the time, which is where the white paper still, as of now, sits, although perhaps that is changing. I'm going to interrupt my own text to read very briefly from this paper to which I just referred. And it's a part of the concluding recommendation of this paper. Though the extensive exploratory work of the Formalized Program Review Task Force, this is an ILA document, including the discussions between task force members, collaborative discussions during the ILA London conference, and the survey in the spring of 2012, it is clear to the task force that formal accreditation is not yet called for. However, the task force also believes that the general perspective of those throughout the field is that more is needed to provide both resources to programs and internal review holders to add to the legitimacy of leadership programs everywhere. It is the recommendation of the Formalized Program Review Task Force that, as part of its offerings and services, the International Leadership Association established external formalized program reviews. I want to be clear here. I was not part of the white paper task force, and I was not privy to any of the relevant discussions either within the ILA or outside it. So I am in no position to know what happened or why. But I raise the subject of this paper because it pertains directly to my general concern about setting standards for leaders and to my specific concern about what the ILA could do, should do, to foster the establishment and indeed the implementation of such standards. As if we were, and those of you who know my writings will know it's not an accident that I'm starting to introduce this term, as if we were or aspired to become a professional association. Again, some of you in this audience will know that I have spent nearly all my professional life in leadership studies. That is, my primary interest has been in leadership as an area of intellectual inquiry. But as a few of you in this audience likely additionally will know, in my last book, which came out a few months ago, Professionalizing Leadership, I took a turn. I turned from leadership studies to leadership development, specifically to the matter of how we teach how to lead. Why? Why did I make this turn? Why, after all this time, did I finally turn to the question of how we teach how to lead? The answers are simple. First, because I did not like what I saw, the unrelenting decline of trust in the leadership class, particularly in liberal democracies. Second, because I did not like what I saw, the failure of too many of us, leadership teachers, leadership administrators, leadership facilitators, leadership coaches, leadership consultants, leadership, you name it, to raise that is our game, and to insist that other leadership experts and educators do the same. In short, I am disturbed by our collective failure to raise the standards to which we would all agree as leadership professionals to adhere, or indeed as a collective to have failed to establish any standards at all. I will not here reiterate the argument I make in professionalizing leadership. In fact, I am aware that a few of you recently debated the merits and deficits of what I wrote. I will, however, reiterate the book's overarching point that unless we leadership experts take on some of the trappings of professionals, say doctors or lawyers, we endanger our reputations, which in any case are tenuous at best. This is not to say that professionalism has spared doctors, for example, from the decline in trust or from, as Tom Nichols puts it in a book titled The Death of Expertise. To the contrary, the medical profession is also experiencing growing distrust, but not at the same level as the leadership class, not even close. Moreover, while our level of trust in doctors has absolutely declined, most of us do not hesitate even now to go to a medical professional or with a medical question or concern. We know that generally our doctors have been well educated and well trained, and that throughout their professional lives, most will be required to continue to learn. And so generally, we deem them both reasonably ethical and reasonably effective. Leaders, in contrast, the military being a major exception to this general rule, are not required to present even a scintilla of evidence that they have been educated to lead or trained to lead or developed as leaders. Moreover, they are not asked to meet any kind of requirement or to provide any sort of certification of excellence, even of competence. Ironically, we do typically require evidence of competence not only from our doctors and lawyers, but from our hairdressers and truck drivers, from our dog groomers and coal miners and daycare workers. We do not, though, require any such evidence from our leaders, not even from those who would aspire to ascend to the nation's highest political office. Would you believe, and I end with this question, that it is possible, in theory, hypothetically, ostensibly, and putatively possible to become President of the United States without any political or military or government experience or expertise whatsoever? Would you believe that to be possible? So, shall I take the questions? You want to say something? Do you want to say something? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Huge thank you to Barbara for what a stimulating and what a call to action. I'm delighted that Barbara raised the issue of standards and raised the issue of the role of the ILA within that. And we must be held to account. And my commitment is that we will be. Our strategic action plan over the next 3 years includes that. But we have time now for question and answers, and I'm not going to be the agent and intervene. So Barbara's going to manage this.
Can we turn on my lavalier mic? Yay, okay. Again, I started with this note of tragedy. I tend to I tend to want to have a good time and to be funny. There's something a little askew this morning because of what I heard, and you guys now will know details that I do not. But if anyone has any questions or arguments or comments or whatever, now's the time to get at me, to get at the ILA, to get at whoever or whatever. I think there are hand mics in the audience, yes? Okay, does anybody, I can't see too well. No, you're not telling me that not a single person in this room, even if only to like criticize me, nicely, by the way, you're only allowed to criticize me nicely.
Barbara, thank you. This was quite a call to action. I do want to raise something that's a part of what you asked. I'm another Barbara Crosby. You talked about this age of transparency.
Yes.
Do you have thoughts about how we better prepare the people in our leadership education programs to live a life of transparency that's susceptible to this kind of observation?
Yeah. In other words, if everything was transparent about them, it would be okay. Look, Barbara, here's my answer to that question. If we knew how to do that, if we knew really how to teach people to live a good life, we would have done so 2, 3, 4, 5,000 years ago. I have to be careful in this group because I know that in most leadership programs, ethics plays a very big role. And I do not demean ethics. I'm a believer in good ethics. I think ethics are nice and good. But let's get real here. We don't know exactly how to teach them, how to raise good people. There's been a huge amount of research on, for example, in World War II, why were there a small number of people who resisted the Nazis? When they were interviewed, they would typically say, you know, I didn't think about it, I just did the right thing. But they were not raised any differently. It's not as if religion played a huge role or education played a huge role or their parents. We simply don't know, Barbara, how to train people so that transparency wouldn't harm them. I guess I would say the biggest favor we can do, and it's why I believe in the trilogy and in this order of leadership education, leadership training, and leadership development. In other words, I believe that I've come to believe, I didn't used to think about this, but I do now, as I said, I believe that leadership education is the absolute foundation on which all leadership learning should take place. And in that leadership education, if we get people to understand intellectually, viscerally, that they are now going to be vulnerable to the transparency that you addressed, maybe that will serve as some kind of control. It's a little early yet to tell, but I think it's at least possible. And if there's a more magic solution than that one, alas, I don't know it. But that's a great question. I see some hands here. We need a mic. We need some mics down here. It's a big room, so.
All right.
Oh, you got one. Sorry. Hi.
Yes, Barbara, it's Willie Donaldson, and we spoke at the INCOSE conference a while ago.
Yes.
And I'm struck, you know, I'm a systems thinker, and I'm struck by the statement that the system's perfectly designed to get the results it's getting today. So our political systems are designed to get the discourse we're getting today, our business systems, et cetera. You wrote a wonderful article about that, about leadership as a system. Would you comment on that and how we change the system, not just the leadership in it?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. That allows me to give you an answer. I have permission to give you an answer. Yeah, those of you who were in the follower panel yesterday that had originally been organized by Ira Chaliff, thank you again, Ira, if you're here, know that I never, ever, ever, ever speak anymore about leadership. I always talk about the leadership system. People are going to be sick and tired of hearing me say it, but I give equal, it is not to diminish the importance of the leader. I give equal time. It's a third, a third, and a third. Leaders, followers, and context. It is a systemic independence, interdependence, intradependence. You can't talk about leadership anymore without talking about the other. Whoever else is around, use the word stakeholders or constituents or followers. I don't care what language you use. But do not look at Donald Trump, to use this ghastly example, if only because it's so damn ubiquitous, but what the hell. You can't understand Donald Trump without understanding the cheering throngs behind him. You can't understand Donald Trump without understanding the Republican Party in Congress. How do you understand Donald Trump without looking at how Republican senators and Congress, members of Congress have behaved in the last year and a half? You can't get it. You can't understand any of this without looking at the larger context within which The whole system now is embedded, within which these people are embedded. That is the United States toward the end of the second decade of the 21st century, economically, politically, religiously, institutionally, in terms of class, in terms of factions, in terms of communities. You need to get it all. Leadership is much, much more complicated than we like generally to think, but it's also simple if you think of it in terms of leaders, followers, and context, and endlessly rich. It's unbelievably richer to think of leadership as a system with those three parts than it is constantly to focus on the person at the top. And it's also irrelevant because the person at the top simply in no way has the power that he or she used to. And if you'll permit my little hobby horse, since everything is connected to everything else, it explains the rise, not just the decline in liberal democracies, but the rise in authoritarianism is precisely because followers feel emboldened now in the ways they did not in the past. So these people under Xi Jinping or Putin or Sisi in Egypt or Erdogan, they correctly get, they've read their Machiavelli. They get that if they want to maintain power, they must be more oppressive and suppressive than they were a decade ago. And they're right. Everything is connected to everything else. It's blissfully complicated and wonderfully simple simultaneously. I hope that was a bit of an answer. Okay, so we now have a bunch of questions. Yes,
okay.
Sorry.
Gamma Perucci.
I don't see who.
I
got it. Yes, hi.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Barbara. And I'm Gamma Perucci from Marietta College.
Oh, hi there. Okay.
The white paper.
I know you. I just can't see you, but okay.
Right.
Hi.
The white paper that you referenced, actually, thank you, Danny. We'll talk later. I commissioned that white paper as chair of the board of directors.
Right.
But one of the pushback that we received with that white paper was the argument that if you moved in the direction of accreditation, there would be a loss of creativity and innovation on the part of leadership programs. So my question is, could you comment on that argument? What are the trade-offs with the standard argument that you present?
Am I allowed to use the F word in this room? Give me a F break, okay? This is not about suppressing creativity, authenticity, innovation. It is not about that. And the idea that if you have more rigor and greater standards, you're necessarily eliminating or quashing the other is, in my view, ridiculous. If we do not elevate the standards of our profession, and we're all in this together, if we do not raise the standards of what we collectively do, I can promise you that in 20 years we'll be standing here and asking ourselves what happened. We have got to do this work. I don't want to name any names, and none of you know where I happen to teach, but I can tell you, virtually no one is immune from the syndrome to which I refer. It is true, as I say in the book, the military is the single institution that does this reasonably accurately and well. I hope to hell some of you in this room know people in the military. Talk to them. Talk to them about what happens in the Air Force, in the Navy, in the Army, whatever. Talk to them. And you will get that they get educated, they get trained, and they are developed as leaders lifelong. This isn't a semester, this isn't a year, this isn't a weekend of executive education. It is absurd what we do. As I said, hairdressers, truck drivers, electricians, plumbers, not to speak of serious professionals, take their learning experience, their how-to experience seriously. We in the leadership business, as a rule, do not. I'm not saying the military is a paragon of virtue. I am saying they do it right, and do not, I'm warning those of you who may have a question, come back at me and say, oh, but the military has people for years and years and years. The basic principle of education, training, and development can be done in a term. It's not as if you need people for years. You can develop a model that provides a hell of a lot more than we do now, and you can make sure that at the end of this process, you have some proper way, if not of measuring, because that's damn hard to do, the assessment issue, but at least of certifying in a serious way that this person did good work. And if you can't certify that, then the term leader becomes completely and absolutely meaningless. So I hope Gamma didn't kind of get carried away here, but I feel fervently that this, oh my God, we need to be creative, has been the enemy of the good. I do. That's my own opinion. It doesn't mean I'm right. It means it's my opinion. Okay, we're going to take 2 more questions. Yes, hi.
Hi, my name's Leah Seaman. I'm from Marietta College. I'm an undergrad, sophomore leadership student. So
well, if you're an undergrad, you can't speak.
Okay, I'll sit down.
Go ahead.
So I'm a baby in the leadership field, and in my leadership class, my professors are here. They're going to be very proud of me. I learned something. In my leadership class, we've been studying trait theory, behavior theory, and the strengths and criticisms of those theories. One of the criticisms of those theories is that there's no actual definition of what traits, behaviors, skills make up an effective leader because humanity is so diverse, everyone has so many different opinions. So my question to you is, how are you going to define what an effective leader is if everyone's opinion of an effective leader is different? I do not support Donald Trump. I do not believe he is an effective leader in certain aspects. But a follower of Donald Trump would argue with me and say he is. So where is your standard to begin from?
Great question. Thank you very much. Oh my God, wait a minute. Her question gets more applause than my speech. What the hell is this? It's a very good question. So the leadership field, as most of you in this room will know, is bedeviled by the issue of language. It came up yesterday in the follower panel. People hate the word follower. Other people go, okay, it's the natural obverse of leader. So here is what I tell students, and I tell anyone who cares to listen. The word leader alone, setting aside the words that you mentioned, has whatever, 400 definitions, 300 tons of different definitions. All I tell people is that they should, by the way, that is both exhausting, all these definitional issues, but it's also very freeing. So you're a serious student of this. You come up with your own definitions. All you need to do when you're speaking or communicating in writing is tell the reader or the listener how you're using the word. So the word leader, let's just take that. It generally has the adjective in front of it good, like I'm learning how to be a leader, meaning I'm learning how to be a good leader. I see the word leader as totally value-free. Some leaders are good, some leaders are bad. All it requires is explain to your audience, whoever that audience is, how you are using the language, and then God bless you. Nobody can argue with you because for every definition, there's another definition that is in fact quite different. So go for it. Feel free to impose your own definitions on the language you use. That is at least my answer, and it's very hard to argue with because there are so many choices. Okay, I see some other hands raised. I think we're going to do one other question. Yes, do you have a mic? Okay. Last question. Is it very smart and very interesting and very good?
Well,
I mean, we need a great question.
Yeah, you're raising the standards for me.
Okay. Touche, very good,
yeah,
touche.
Yeah.
Very good, very nice.
I always love, your interventions. They are provocative. One of the, I love ILA. One of the concerns that I always have ILA is that it's pretty much the body of energy scholarship is pretty much European and North American. And we are an international entity. So in the context of the rest of the world and standards, I'm a former many years ago director of community health promotions. And I went through accreditation, and innovation and creativity is one of the pillars of any accreditation. So while I'm supportive, I'm starting to think, how does context for the rest of the world would work here? Because pretty much here, we have a core challenge of trying to diversify and make this entity, this body, really international. So how would standardization or accreditation really work in a global context.
Yeah, I honestly do not, I'm not saying this is easy and that it can be done in a day, but high standards are high standards. And again, this is not about not admitting innovation and creativity. Innovation and creativity can be part of the standards. I'm just saying, set some standards. Do something so that people know this is an association that stands for minimum conception of what is good, what is able, what is reasonably ethical and reasonably effective. Look, why should culture impact on the excellence of a leader but not on the excellence of a physician or a truck driver? You know, if I'm driving a truck in the United States or in China or in Argentina, I need to be able to keep to my side of the road. I need to know the rules of the road, whatever it is. I'm just saying, it doesn't seem to me that excellence is something that is culturally bound, at least not always and by definition. And this conception, and I should really let Gama answer this question, of excellence, I have no doubt that it can be sensitive to the issue that you raise. I get it. You're right. I said earlier, I'm a huge believer in the importance of context, but I don't think that context or culture transcends being reasonably ethical and reasonably effective. And that's all I'm asking, that we develop, that we have a way of making sure that when we approve that somebody graduates, or whatever the right word is, completes a leadership program, we have some way of indicating to them the rough equivalent of the Hippocratic Oath. Do no harm, be reasonably ethical, and be reasonably effective. And that's the standard that I'm talking about. And I do not think that basic standard is context specific, at least not, again, in my view. So thank you very much. And
thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Barbara. So I want a very special thank you for a very special intervention. Provocative, challenging, but genuine. Thank you very much.
thank you. I'll get my
Your
papers
glasses in a
later.
minute.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. So we now have the opportunity to look forward in terms of our next gathering in Ottawa. So can I ask the Ottawa team to join me on the stage?
Hi, my name is Ingrid Richter. We're thrilled to be welcoming you to Ottawa for next year's conference. We love our city and can't wait for you to experience this G7 capital and all that it has to offer. With a population of 1.3 million, Ottawa is the political heartbeat of Canada. We have a large concentration of policymakers, government leaders, national associations, and direct access to 130 embassies. We have a brand new state-of-the-art conference center located in the heart of downtown, which makes access to fantastic restaurants, galleries, museums, and shops just steps away.
As sponsors of the 2019 conference, the Telford School of Management at the University of Ottawa is honored to be working with the ILA to create an engaging and unforgettable program. The 2019 conference will focus on the topic of leadership, courage required. The world is ripe for leaders to act courageously, but we live in a time where leading with courage is imperative. We look forward to hearing your different perspectives and new concepts that will bring this theme to life in Ottawa.
Hi, my name is Glenn Orsay. It takes courage to bring on change. We invite you and your colleagues to create and submit thought-provoking, inspiring workshops and conversations that will motivate us as leaders. Join us, challenge our thinking and our practices as courageous leaders. Picture yourselves in 1 year, attending another remarkable ILA conference and meeting new and old friends in another beautiful setting where conversations about courageous leadership will inspire your own courageous leadership journey.
Nous sommes ravis de vous accueillir l'année prochaine à Ottawa.
See you next year in Ottawa, Canada. Come see where leadership lives.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the in-person version of Glenn Orsak, the movie star that was you just witnessed in the video. I'm the Director of Executive Leadership Programs at Telfer, and together with my colleague Dinah and Ingrid Richter, we are your conference conveners for next year. And we're thrilled to be starting the planning process for that. I first want to acknowledge and point out the great hosts that we've had for this conference from the Palm Beach Atlantic University. Great hosts and great conference chairs. Truly set a standard for next year, and now we must, Dinah and Ingrid and I and the whole group of committees must exceed that standard for next year, and I know we can and we will. As we stated in the video and as I'm commenting, we have now got our feet wet and have started the planning process and are both thrilled and daunted by that concept. But we have met so many people this week and have so many great ideas that are already coming forward for next year. Great sources of inspiration for what I know we can do next year. So I can't wait to see you next year in Ottawa and to show you around our great city. It's one of Canada's gems, and we hope that you are planning now to come to Ottawa. Dinah.
Thank you, Glenn. My name is Dinah Mazudis. I'm an endowed professor of ethics, responsibility, and sustainability at the Telfer School of Management at the University of Ottawa. And I'm delighted to be working with Glenn and Ingrid and the entire ILA team on putting together the conference program for next year. We are, as you know, the theme for the conference is Courage, Leadership Required. And I think as we've heard even just now and throughout the conference, all the different sessions and so forth, we've never lived at a time where courage is more required. And so we are thrilled that that is the theme. And as was so eloquently put by Catherine in the opening plenary, we are living in this space between a time of no longer and a time of not yet. And we're kind of hoping that your proposals that you bring forward to Ottawa will maybe move us past that and into a place where maybe we're at almost there or a bit better so that we can fulfill the ILA mission of building knowledge and leadership practice for a better world. So the call for proposals opens on November 15th. That's in less than 3 weeks. We invite all of your bold ideas, your symposiums, your workshops, and all of that, all of your great ideas to come to Ottawa. And nous sommes vraiment très ravis de vous accueillir l'année prochaine à Ottawa. We are very happy to invite you to Ottawa, and we really do want you to come see where leadership lives.
So, of course, I encourage us all to be there in Ottawa, and it'd be great to see you all again. But before you leave today, it's our tradition to be together, to work together, and to leave following some weaving together of our work. And our weaver this year is V. I'd ask you to come and do your job. Thanks so much, V.
I would like to start by thanking the leaders of the ILA for inviting me to serve in the capacity of Conference Weaver. It's a great honor, and I hope to do it justice. Conference weaving is a particularly difficult task because it positions one person as the spokesperson for the entire ILA community and requires them to articulate a common conference experience. The problem, of course, is that such a thing does not exist. The beauty and the challenge of a conference like the annual meeting of the ILA is that it's not one singular event experienced universally by all. It occurs differently for each of us, even if we are sitting in the same sessions, hearing the same speakers, engaging in the same activities, and connecting with the same colleagues. So in some ways, it's an incredibly disingenuous thing for me to stand here and say I speak for all. However, this is my charge nonetheless, and I will attempt to give voice in my own, albeit limited way, to what I have seen over the past few days. I think many would agree that the ILA is a special place. Attending the annual meetings means having an oasis in our calendars, an oasis to reconnect with ourselves, our colleagues, our students, our mentors, and in some cases, the very reasons we went into this work in the first place. It can be very easy to get lost in the sea of demands, aspirations, agendas, and challenges day-to-day reality places upon us. Catherine Tyler Scott, as part of this year's opening, said something that I kept coming back to as I attempted to make sense of the 20th meeting of the ILA. She said, "This was a time of no longer and not yet." I think this is particularly important because I've heard a great deal of conversation at this conference around what can be no longer and what we are working toward, which we have yet to reach. No longer can we work at the fringes, afraid to push back against the oppressive and restrictive conditions and circumstances. We can no longer be fearful to reach out to colleagues of different statuses, identities, beliefs, and life paths, or be self-effacing when confronting the challenges of today's society. We are no longer in a place where those of us who do leadership can be modest about our craft. We are not yet in a place where this is comfortable, easy, or natural. But what I have seen here in the past few days gives me hope. I have hope because I have seen seasoned scholars who have helped pave the paths that so many of us have tried to walk utter the words, "I don't know, I'm not sure, and let's find out together." I have hope because I've heard junior scholars, practitioners, and relative newcomers to our conversation say, "I'll try, I think I can, I'll take the lead on that." I'm optimistic because I've seen people who otherwise might never encounter one another, despite the fact that they do the very similar things a world apart, find support, collaboration, and community in each other's company. While we may live in a larger society that precariously navigates deep social and personal divisions, watching the people of the ILA navigate one another inspires me to believe that we can, together, walk boldly from the time of no longer into the era of not yet. Despite being an oasis, the ILA is no utopia. As broader society learns to contend with the fault lines of social identity, so too must we face these divisions. This oasis of ours is not impervious to the social dynamics threatening to tear our communities apart. If we truly believe that we need to give the work of leadership back to the people, then we must stop gatekeeping knowledge and developmental experiences behind walled gardens, exclusive events, and mazes built of social and cultural capital. I would imagine the reach of the ILA is broader and deeper than it ever has been, and I believe the only way to maintain and sustain our collective cognitive diversity is by breaking down the ideological and practical barriers we ourselves have constructed simply because we've always done it this way. We are the DNA of the ILA, and if anything is going to change, it has to start with us. Being 20 years old means we're still young enough to try new things and old enough to know how to do them really, really well. In one session I was in yesterday, the presenter had a small graphic on one of their slides that read, "If you want peace, work for justice." One of the things that seems to link a great deal of scholarship coming from the ILA and its attendees is an orientation towards social change and justice. Every day we see the cost of not working toward change and justice. Our very conference theme centers on progress, peace, and prosperity. And so my charge to each of us as we return to our daily lives is to find ways to advance teaching, research, and service aimed toward progress, peace, and prosperity. And we may very well find that we are actually working for justice. Thank you for your time, for your attention, for your intention, and safe travels to your next destination.
So, thank you, V, so much for those thoughtful words. And the last word must go to our dear friend and host, Greg. Thank you so much for everything you've done.
Mike, you said it's hard to sum up a conference in one word, and it reminded me of a story when Sir Christopher Wren was showing the king St. Paul's, is that the cathedral? Yes. The king said, magical, amusing, and awful. And Sir Christopher Wren was astounded and jubilant because magical meant majestic, amusing meant amazing, and awful meant full of awe. And so I think our conference has had those same things. A lot has happened in the 2.5 days since I was last up here, and it's been our privilege to serve you. Over 90 of our students and faculty and staff, and even, as I mentioned, a fellow dean has volunteered, and we have enjoyed getting to know you and having our students exposed to you and the thoughtfulness that you have and stimulated, and they've been able to sit in on sessions, so we appreciate that. I have a presentation that I do. It's called Wicked Leadership, 6 wonderful, popular, gravity-defying principles from the musical Wicked. And the last one concludes with one of the songs that's towards the end. It's called For Good. You're probably familiar with it. The two witches are talking and some of the tension that they had, but they said, I believe that I've been changed for the better because of you. And so I trust that's been true here, that you have been changed for the better. I know we have been changed for the better. And to the ILA leadership, why don't we do this again in 4 years here? Thanks so much. Travel safely. The conference is now over.